In the Charaka Samhita, one of the oldest medical texts on Earth, written in India over 2,000 years ago, there is a passage that stops you when you read it with modern eyes. It says that sleep, taken at the wrong time or taken without consistency, produces a derangement of the vital forces that precedes diseases of the heart and vessels. 2,000 years ago, no blood pressure monitors, no cholesterol panels, no echocardiograms. They were watching people, watching who got sick, watching who didn't. And what they kept seeing, across centuries of careful attention, was that the people who slept consistently, at the right time, in darkness, were the ones whose hearts held. In 2024, a team of researchers published the largest cardiovascular sleep study ever conducted. 72,000 people, 8 years of follow-up. Sleep measured objectively by wrist accelerometer, not questionnaires, actual data. They tracked who had heart attacks, strokes, and heart failure. The single strongest predictor of major cardiovascular events was not cholesterol, not blood pressure, not family history. It was whether you went to bed and woke up at the same time every night. Irregular sleepers had a 26% higher rate of heart attack, stroke, and heart failure than consistent sleepers. And people who slept enough total hours, but at irregular times, were still at elevated risk. The timing was the variable, not the quantity. The Charaka Samhita said it first. The Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health confirmed it in 2024. This is the Lost Dispensary. We find what was buried. Today, the ancient sleep protocol that protects your heart, the 5 mechanisms that explain exactly why it works, and a practical system you can implement tonight. No prescription, no pharmacy, free. Quick thing, if you want more recovered knowledge like this, hit subscribe. It's free, it keeps this channel alive, and I promise to keep digging. Every major ancient health tradition left specific instructions about sleep. What is remarkable is not that they valued it. It is how precisely their recommendations align with what modern biology has since confirmed. The Charaka Samhita prescribed sleep before midnight as essential for what it called ojas, cardiovascular and immune resilience. It prescribed waking at Brahma Muhurta, roughly 90 minutes before sunrise. And it warned that sleeping at irregular or inconsistent times creates vata derangement, which in modern terms translates to sympathetic nervous system dysregulation, elevated cortisol, and disrupted autonomic function. The text was describing the biology of non-dipping without knowing what non-dipping was. Ancient Chinese medicine went further. Traditional Chinese medicine organized the body's organ systems into a 24-hour cycle, where each 2-hour window of the night was assigned to a specific organ. The liver, 1 to 3 a.m. The lungs, 3 to 5 a.m. TCM practitioners maintained that disrupting the liver's window through late sleep or wakefulness impaired the organ's capacity to filter toxins from the blood. What modern hepatology confirms is that liver detoxification and glycogen processing are indeed most active during those hours, governed by the liver's own internal circadian clock. The ancients were mapping biology without knowing it. Hippocrates, writing around 400 BCE, documented that disturbed or inconsistent sleep reliably preceded serious disease of the heart and vessels. He noted that patients who slept poorly before major illness showed elevated nighttime pulse, excessive warmth, and what he called a restlessness of the body that does not settle. A description that reads almost exactly like the elevated nighttime cortisol and fragmented autonomic function that modern sleep medicine identifies in cardiovascular risk patients. Before artificial light, all of this was automatic. Pre-industrial humans slept within 2 to 3 hours of darkness, consistently, every night, governed by the solar cycle. Archaeological research on modern hunter-gatherer populations living without electricity, the San people of southern Africa, the Chimane of Bolivia, documents sleep onset approximately 3 hours after sunset, waking before sunrise, total sleep 6.5 to 8 hours. These populations show cardiovascular disease rates that are a fraction of age-matched Western populations. Then came the electric light bulb, 1879. Within 2 generations, Western populations were staying awake 3 and 4 hours past the light-dark transition that had governed human sleep for all of evolutionary history. Within a century, sleeping 5 hours and functioning on caffeine had become a cultural badge. The ancient protocol wasn't buried by a pharmaceutical company or suppressed by an institution. It was drowned by electricity and ambition. Modern medicine spent the following century focused on pathogens, then pharmaceuticals, then measurable biomarkers, cholesterol, blood pressure, glucose, that drugs could move. Sleep was classified as a behavioral preference, not a biological necessity with precise cardiovascular consequences. Dr. Francesco Cappuccio at the University of Warwick changed that in 2011. His meta-analysis in the European Heart Journal, the most prestigious cardiovascular journal in Europe, pooled 15 studies and nearly 500,000 participants followed for up to 25 years. Sleeping 6 hours or fewer per night was independently associated with a 48% increased risk of developing or dying from coronary heart disease. Not 12%, 48%. A magnitude comparable to what major statin drugs claim to prevent, running in the opposite direction. His paper was cited hundreds of times. It was almost never translated into clinical practice. The American Heart Association waited 11 more years, until 2022, to formally acknowledge what Cappuccio and hundreds of subsequent researchers had documented. That year, they added sleep to their cardiovascular health framework, Life's Essential 8, alongside diet, exercise, blood pressure, and cholesterol. 2,000 years after the Charaka Samhita, they finally agreed. Your heart doesn't sleep when you sleep, it recovers. And there are 5 specific mechanisms by which consistent, properly timed sleep protects the cardiovascular system. Mechanisms that the ancient traditions observed in their outcomes without ever naming their biology. Your sleep doesn't just rest your heart, it resets it every night. The first mechanism is the nocturnal pressure drop. When you fall into deep sleep, the autonomic nervous system shifts from sympathetic dominance, the alert, responsive daytime state, into parasympathetic mode. Heart rate slows, cardiac output decreases. Blood pressure falls 10 to 20% below daytime levels. This is called nocturnal dipping. Think about what it means. Your heart beats 100,000 times per day. Your blood vessels are under constant pressure every minute, all day. The nocturnal dip is the only scheduled recovery period your arteries get. During those hours of reduced pressure, the endothelial lining of every blood vessel can repair microscopic damage accumulated during the day. Inflammatory signals quiet. The arterial walls regain elasticity. If you sleep poorly, or at the wrong time relative to your circadian clock, this dip doesn't happen. Your cardiovascular system runs at full operational load, 24 hours a day, with no recovery window. A 2023 analysis in the AHA's journal Hypertension confirmed that non-dippers, people whose blood pressure doesn't drop at night, face a 20 to 30% higher cardiovascular event risk than dippers, independent of what their daytime blood pressure reads. Your doctor's office reading doesn't tell you whether you're a non-dipper. You can have a perfectly normal daytime reading and still carry a 30% risk premium that nobody has measured. The second mechanism is the nightly repair crew, deep sleep. The slow wave stages that dominate the first half of the night triggers the largest pulse of growth hormone your body produces. Over 70% of daily growth hormone secretion occurs in the first 2 to 3 hours after sleep onset. This is not the muscle-building hormone of fitness culture. This is the primary cellular repair signal, stimulating the rebuilding of smooth muscle cells lining arterial walls, promoting endothelial repair. supporting the structural integrity of the heart muscle itself. When you cut sleep to 5 or 6 hours, or fragment it repeatedly, you cut off the deep sleep that produces this signal. The repair crew stops showing up. Over months and years, the arterial walls that should be continuously maintained begin to accumulate the damage of skipped repairs. This is the mechanism that connects short sleep duration to measurable arterial stiffening and reduced vascular elasticity. The third mechanism is the inflammatory reset. Every night of adequate sleep resets the inflammatory system. Chronic low-grade inflammation is now recognized as a central driver of atherosclerosis, the plaque disease underlying most heart attacks and strokes. When you sleep poorly, two inflammatory molecules, interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha, remain elevated the following day. They do not return to baseline. And elevated IL-6 and TNF-alpha directly damage the endothelial lining, making arterial walls adhesive and prone to trapping oxidized cholesterol. One night of poor sleep produces a measurable spike in these markers. Chronic poor sleep produces a chronically elevated state that never resets. The inflammatory damage compounds silently across years until it surfaces as a cardiovascular event. Every night of good sleep is a return to baseline. The ancient traditions that called sleep a healing necessity were observing the output of this mechanism without knowing its name. The fourth mechanism is the circadian clock, and this is the one the 2024 UK Biobank study revealed as the most clinically significant finding in recent sleep research. Every organ in your body has its own molecular clock: the heart, the liver, the adrenal glands, the arterial walls. These organ clocks run on a 24-hour cycle, synchronized to the external light-dark environment through the master clock in the brain. When your sleep timing is consistent, all of these clocks run in synchrony, coordinating repair, inflammation, blood pressure regulation, and metabolic function in a precisely orchestrated daily program. When your sleep timing is irregular, shifting by 2 or 3 hours across the week, these clocks desynchronize. The heart starts running on a different schedule from the liver. The adrenal clock fires cortisol at the wrong time relative to the cardiovascular repair cycle. Inflammatory signals activate when vascular repair is trying to run. It is the biological equivalent of a factory where every department has been put on a different shift. The work still gets attempted, but the coordination that makes it protective breaks down. 72,000 people, 8 years, objective sleep measurement. Irregular sleepers, 26% higher rate of major cardiovascular events. Even those sleeping enough total hours. The timing was an independent protective variable that quantity alone could not substitute for. The fifth mechanism is the cortisol-glucose cascade. Cortisol is supposed to reach its lowest point around midnight to 2 a.m., then begin a slow rise that peaks 30 minutes after waking. This curve is controlled by the circadian clock. When sleep is disrupted, this curve flattens. Cortisol stays elevated at night. It keeps blood vessels in partial constriction, directly preventing the nocturnal dip. It signals the liver to release glucose with no physical activity to use it. Insulin resistance develops. HDL falls. Triglycerides rise. Every metabolic cardiovascular risk factor worsens through a single upstream mechanism. For people over 50, this is amplified. Cortisol regulation becomes less precise with age. The circadian clock's amplitude decreases naturally. Poor sleep habits compound a vulnerability that was already increasing. 5 mechanisms. The ancients observed the outcomes of all 5 across centuries without naming any of them. Now you have both the observation and the name. Now here's what you actually do. Tonight, this week, 5 priorities ranked by evidence for cardiovascular impact. The first and highest impact priority: anchor your circadian clock with a consistent wake time. This is the single intervention most directly supported by the 2024 regularity finding. The wake time, not the bedtime, is the master anchor. Choose a fixed wake time and do not deviate from it by more than 30 minutes. Weekdays, weekends, vacations, mornings after poor sleep, all of them. Within the first 30 minutes of waking, get outside into natural light for a minimum of 10 minutes. If you live where morning light is unavailable, a 10,000 lux light therapy lamp placed within 2 feet of your face for 20 minutes is an effective substitute. This light signal resets the master clock and coordinates every downstream circadian function: cortisol, melatonin, blood pressure, organ clock timing. On mornings after poor sleep, resist sleeping in. Sleeping later shifts your clock and makes the following night harder. Hold the wake time. The second priority: protect the nocturnal pressure dip through environment design. 3 factors matter most: light exposure in the evening, blue spectrum light from phones, tablets, and LED overhead lighting suppresses melatonin production and delays the parasympathetic shift that initiates the pressure dip. Switch overhead lighting to warm spectrum bulbs of 2700 K or lower after sundown, and use blue light filter settings on screens in the 2 hours before bed. For adults over 50, melatonin production is already reduced with age. Any additional suppression has an outsized effect. Bedroom temperature. Core body temperature must drop 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit to initiate and sustain deep sleep. The research-validated optimal range is 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. A warm bath or shower 90 minutes before bed works by causing rapid heat loss as you exit. Core temperature drops faster than passive cooling, accelerating sleep onset and deepening the first slow wave stage. Alcohol timing. Alcohol suppresses slow wave sleep architecture completely in the second half of the night, regardless of whether it helps with onset. The research-supported cutoff is 3 hours before intended sleep. After that threshold, its impact on deep sleep becomes clinically significant for cardiovascular recovery. The third priority: the magnesium-glycine stack. Magnesium is involved in the regulation of GABA, the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter that quiets neurological activity and initiates sleep. Magnesium deficiency, estimated to affect over 50% of Western adults, is directly associated with elevated nighttime cortisol and disrupted sleep architecture. The most bioavailable supplemental forms are magnesium glycinate and magnesium threonate. Avoid magnesium oxide, poor absorption. 200 to 400 milligrams taken 30 to 60 minutes before sleep. Glycine is an amino acid that functions as an inhibitory neurotransmitter. At 3 grams in water 30 to 60 minutes before bed, randomized controlled trials show it reduces core body temperature, shortens time to slow-wave sleep onset, and improves morning alertness. Under $20 a month. Excellent safety profile at this dose. Together, under $30 a month. The cardiovascular benefit operates through the sleep improvement they support, which then activates the 5 mechanisms described above. The fourth priority: the tart cherry protocol. Montmorency tart cherries contain naturally occurring melatonin, tryptophan, and anthocyanins, polyphenols that inhibit the enzyme that normally breaks down tryptophan before it converts to melatonin. The result is more of your own melatonin, produced through the body's natural pathway, not a large external dose that can disrupt the natural rhythm. A 2023 systematic review of 8 clinical trials found objective improvements in total sleep time and sleep efficiency. Protocol: 240 milliliters of unsweetened Montmorency tart cherry juice twice daily, morning and 1 to 2 hours before bed. A tablespoon of concentrate in water is a more economical alternative. Minimum 2 to 4 weeks of consistent use. The mechanism requires accumulated polyphenol availability. It is not an acute effect. If you take blood thinners or anti-inflammatory medications, Discuss with your physician before adding tart cherry regularly. The fifth priority, the 10-3-2-1 countdown. 10 hours before sleep, last caffeine. Caffeine's half-life is 5 to 7 hours. A 2 p.m. coffee still has 25% of its stimulant load active at midnight. For adults over 50, clearance slows further. 3 hours before sleep, last large meal, last alcohol. 2 hours before sleep, end all high-arousal cognitive activity, financial decisions, difficult conversations, news. These keep cortisol elevated past the window where it should be declining. 1 hour before sleep, screens off or blue light filtered, lighting dimmed. The final signal to the circadian system that darkness is arriving and the melatonin cascade should begin. The ancient health traditions embedded this wind-down structure naturally, quieting firelight, ending the demands of the day, because the pre-industrial environment enforced it. The 10-3-2-1 protocol is the modern reconstruction of what the circadian environment once provided automatically. One note on who needs to go further. If you snore loudly, have been told you stop breathing during sleep, or wake feeling unrested despite enough time in bed, these are symptoms of sleep apnea. OSA is an independent cardiovascular risk factor associated with elevated blood pressure and atrial fibrillation. Behavioral sleep optimization does not treat it. Evaluation by a sleep medicine specialist is the priority. Our ancestors built sleep protection into the architecture of daily life because they watched what happened when it was absent. The Charaka Samhita documented it. Hippocrates documented it. The TCM organ clock encoded it. For 150 years since industrialization, the cardiovascular consequences of abandoning that architecture have been compounding. The 2022 American Heart Association decision to add sleep to life's essential 8 was not a new discovery. It was medicine finally catching up to what 2,000 years of careful observation had already established. The knowledge was never lost. It was waiting for us to stop dismissing it. If you start with one thing, choose a fixed wake time. Hold it for 2 weeks without deviation. Morning light immediately after. That single anchor initiates the circadian resynchronization that all 5 mechanisms depend on. Last year, a man in his early 60s wrote to me. He had spent 40 years waking whenever his body let him, sometimes 6, sometimes 8, different every day. His blood pressure had been creeping upward for a decade despite medication. He tried the wake time anchor for 6 weeks. His morning readings dropped enough that his cardiologist asked what he had changed. He hadn't changed his diet. He hadn't changed his medication. He had only changed the time he opened his eyes. His cardiologist had no explanation. The Charaka Samhita did. What practice from your own family's tradition around sleep do you want us to investigate? Drop it in comments. That's how this dispensary grows. The dispensary stays open. See you in the next recovery.